and good evening if you're in Asia. My name is Dwayne Schultes, and today I'll be moderating a webinar on advanced therapies with some of Europe's leaders in the field. Before we get started, I'd like to walk you through the tools that you can use today in the course of our webinar to interact with us. We've had over 100 people register, so it would be virtually impossible to open up the microphones, but we'll be doing our best to be able to interact with you. You can raise your hand, and I see there are a few questions already. I'll certainly be reaching out to you during the course of the webinar. If you're having internet or connection problems, you do have the ability to switch between the Skype use mic and speaker setting and using the telephone. And of course, you can ask a question in the course of using the webinar tools and the questions log. I'll be checking those periodically to see if we're up to date. And we also have a Twitter feed, and you can use the EBE Twitter hashtag EBE_EU. And we'll be monitoring that as we go forward. Now, this webinar is a preview, a taster menu, if you will, of our Advanced Therapies report we will be releasing in partnership with EBE at the BioVision conference to be held on April 15th and 16th in Lyon. And if you are an EBE member, you can attend this release for free as part of your membership in the organization. And I believe there are still about a half dozen tickets still remaining. We've gone through about 50, so please register as soon as possible if you are interested in attending. Getting to the subject of the day, Europe is a world leader in the fundamental science underpinning tissue, cell, and gene therapies, what are called advanced therapies, as well as in their use and regulation. Now, although they're still in the early stages of commercialization, there is mounting evidence that these products offer very transformational properties over the more traditional molecule-based pharmaceutical therapies. Now, to date, most of these benefits have been demonstrated in autologous treatments, by which I mean those cells or tissues that are taken from patients and then manipulated in some way and then administered and put back into the patient and the individual, which causes all sorts of scalability issues. However, we're on the cusp of a breakthrough in mass-produced treatments from donor cells, and today we hope to discuss what Europe needs to do and, in many cases, not do to make sure these therapies succeed. So today I'm very pleased to be joined by an extremely august panel. Fatiha Sadallah, the Principal Scientific Manager of the IMI, Dr. Richard Barker, the Director of CASMI, who's sitting to my right here in London, Daniela Couto, the founder of and CEO of Cell2B, as well as Eduardo Bravo, who's the CEO of Tigenix. Now, all four of these individuals will be walking us through the R&D value chain of advanced therapies and hopefully illuminate us as to what is going on. So I'd like to begin with Fatiha from IMI. Good afternoon, Fatiha. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this invitation and give me the opportunity to present a little bit what we are doing in-house in terms of regenerative medicine, but more precisely induced pluripotent stem cell research.
Thank you. So if you could just sort of walk us through what you see under IMI, what IMI 1 did in this space and how you see this going forward, that would be really great, Fatiha, and I give you the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much again. So at IMI, what we are really supporting and what IMI has done lately is a very comprehensive approach in terms of publishing call in the field of induced pluripotent stem cells, and mainly in, in the area of toxicity testing, drug development, and in the preclinical area. The idea is really to have access to well-characterized induced pluripotent stem cells for pharma and for academic in Europe. And the main issue that where these induced pluripotent stem cells will be used is really for understanding disease biology, for developing cell-based assay for predictive toxicology, as well as for development of assay of disease biology towards compounds, testing, efficacy, and toxicity. And as well, developing new protocol to make sure that there is an harmonization and standard operating procedure for all the partners in the field, mainly researchers who are looking forward to have this tool available for their research. So in this frame, we have, as I mentioned, published 2 calls. The first one was on induced pluripotent stem cells for drug discovery and toxicity testing. And the first project, which is up and running now since almost 2 years, is the StemBANCC project, StemBANCC project stands for Stem Cell for Biological Assays of Novel Drug and Predictive Toxicology. The aim of this project is to generate and characterize 1,500 highly quality human-induced pluripotent stem cells from 500 individuals, people, among them, sick people with in the disease area that is targeting in this project, which are diabetes and neurodegenerative disease, central and peripheric neurodegenerative disease, as well as toxicology, and of course healthy also individuals. This project is, a 5-year project and include 10 companies as well as 23 academic participants, and has a total cost of 55.6 million. So if we look a little bit at the achievement so far of this project, which is, I mentioned, up and running since 2 years now, we have some reprogramming subjects which are up and running, and they are above 60 subjects, but for the time being now they are over 100 subjects. These are the last, development, and they are for the time being focused on monogenic disease. So there were also a lot of technology transfer between the different labs, and also information on how this technology will be used. I'm sorry, I've lost my desktop slide, so I am going to try to follow up with the next one. On the top of this, reprogramming subject that they were about to produce, they have also developed and standardized very efficiently different protocol for the differentiation of nociceptive neuron, cortical glutamatergic neuron as well, midbrain dopaminergic neuron, and lately also podocyte differentiation protocol. And for this, they have been patented because there was no precedent to that. If I go now to this project, the European Bank-Induced Pluripotent Stem Cells, which is from the IMI call 8, and which is really about developing central facility for induced pluripotent stem cells. So this is a project which has begun less than 1 year ago, and it has 26 leading European organizations, among which 5 pharmaceutical companies. And the idea is really to establish a central facility for the collection, the testing, and the distribution of induced pluripotent stem cells to researchers. So including in the project is really the generation and the standardization of induced pluripotent stem lines at research grade, of course, the distribution of these cell lines, and the quality control, and the possibility to bank this iPS cell line. Innovative and self-sustainable model will be developed within the lifetime of the project, and the idea is that it will be a non-for-profit bank, which will have not only the stem cells which will be produced in the project itself, but which will receive also from other providers iPSL, which will be then cataloged and harmonized in sense of all the culture and the necessity that will make them clinical, not clinical grade, but research grade induced pluripotent stem cells. So how will you stakeholder benefit from that? As I mentioned, it will be a central source which will be defined and define and disseminate the best practices for the induced pluripotent stem cell-based research. We will have this way strengthened and profile of current European practice for iPS cell-based research, provide, which is very important, a focal point for academic and SMEs for technology innovation, and hopefully enable a faster and most cost-effective research. So this is in a nutshell, if I could, present these two projects, but if you have questions, I am available. What I want to mention here is that we are not yet in the field of advanced therapies, but what we are doing here is, let's say, a little bit en amont, let's say, before getting there in advanced therapy arena, is really try to make sure that we develop tools for researchers in the field. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fatiha. And again, we had a couple little technical glitches, but we worked through them. Thank you very much. One of the things that IMI really specializes in, and one of the strengths of the program, has been developmental tools to facilitate the application of new technologies coming out of academic research. If we look at, IMI2, looking at the crystal ball here, what do you see? One of the core barriers right now is manufacturing scale, the ability to be able to take these pluripotent cells and manufacture them at any sort of scale to make them economically viable. Do you see that as being one of the core toolkits that IMI2 is going to try and develop in this space?
As you mentioned, it is really with the crystal ball that I will answer your question. For the time being, what is this bank developing? It's really about manufacturing, but when I say harmonization of protocol and all that, but before entering in the arena of advanced therapies. So it might be that with the experience and the, knowledge we will acquire with this bank, this will pave the way to something which will go further towards the advanced therapies and eventually the manufacturing aspect that you mentioned, and as well as the regulatory issue which are bound to this field and area. But for the time being, there is not really something which is clear about that, and we hope that in the future, of course, IMI will enter in this arena as well.
Thank you. And when do you see the IMI2 portfolio being developed? What about, are you still taking stakeholder feedback with regards to advanced therapies? What do you see as the timeline, and how are you looking to proceed?
Yeah, as you know, AFPI is very open to all, priority scientific that you can submit to them for, coming calls that might be published. So this, you can go on the AFPI website and you can post whatever, ID or scientific priority which fits with the advanced therapies and which will be analyzed by the RDG Research Directorate group at AFPI. There is a kind of a link that you can go and you can register and put forward your ID. So it's something that is is very flexible, and it's a process which is up and running. So, but to tell you now that we have already a calendar in mind, I can't say that. I just know that there are some discussion about advanced therapies, manufacturing, regulatory issue, and eventually something which will be probably in the field of one particular disease. But for the time being, this is not yet clear. As you know, the priority scientific comes from AFPR, and there is this consultation between the different stakeholders before a call is published. So first of all, you have the opportunity to, game-changing by participating and sending your proposal to AFPR at the link I just mentioned. And these normally ideas are treated by the RDG on, monthly basis, and even less than monthly. I think even every 10 days they collect all the, ID which are submitted, and they analyze them, and then there is a process where all the pharma decide how far they can go there and eventually propose this to IMI, and this is then discussed with the other stakeholder, like the scientific committee, IMI scientific committee, the SRG, the commission, of course, and so on and so forth. So, but clear dates or clear schedule of how and when and if the portfolio of advanced therapies will look and will come. This, for the time being, we do not have this information.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Fatiha. We're going to move on now. If we're looking at the entire value chain, we've just looked at, IMI, which is the sort of the bleeding edge, the cutting edge of research, academic research in particular, this parallel development between pharmaceuticals SMEs and academic research in Europe. And then if we start looking at new technology pathways, I think it comes to CASMI, and Richard Barker, who's sitting next to me. Good afternoon, Richard. Thank you. And so I guess from our standpoint, what would be intriguing is to know how you see CASMI working in partnership as a partner, developing these tools, moving them forward in new clinical pathways, et cetera. And I pass the floor to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dwayne, and thanks for the efforts you put into bringing dialogue together on a European and international level. That's, I think, it plays a very important role. And by the way, so does IMI, I should say that. CASMI has just finished a piece of work with IMI on IMI-1 and how IMI-1 projects might be more effectively engaged with stakeholders across Europe. And I think IMI plays that convener role as well as sponsoring some very important advanced R&D. So moving into my presentation, for those of you who don't know CASMI, it's a joint venture, so to speak, between two UK universities that seeks to transform the effectiveness and sustainability of medical innovation by working with the various stakeholders that you see depicted on that slide. And we think in terms of 4 gaps in translation. And I think we're going to focus mainly here on gap 2. Because, as you say, we have touched there on gap 1, which is translating basic research into candidate products. I'm going to focus on how might we improve the productivity of turning those products into approved products, pipeline products into approved products. What might be some of the particular issues that advanced therapies face? Some of this thinking is based on a consortium that we pulled together, the CASMI Translational Stem Cell Consortium. Here you see the partners for phase 1 of that consortium. We actually have got a much larger number of partners just in a phase 2 consortium that we're starting up just now. So just to remind everybody, this is just a basic definitional slide. What's an advanced therapy medicinal product? It could be a gene therapy, could be a cell therapy, could be a tissue-engineered product. And as the MHRA website says, you can have combination ATMPs, including devices, i.e. implantable devices, as well as cells. You can coat a joint implant in stem cells, for example. And there's a European route for the cell therapy, and then MHRA and other routes for the device. So I just want to put that on the table, that we're going to see some combined therapies and devices. And it's not entirely clear to me yet, maybe it will be clear by the end of this conversation, how such combinations are going to work. So what are some of the issues raised by such therapies? We found technical issues, the ensuring of consistent standards, operating standards, SOPs, manufacturing processes, and delivery technologies. We should not forget the lessons of the last 20 or 30 years that gene therapy is a wonderful idea if you can get it to the site of action. So drug delivery is going to be very important for all of these therapies. Trials, some of these conditions are pretty rare, and therefore how can we set up trials? What is realistic and feasible? The regulatory questions, how should we classify and regulate these technologies? How will the relationship evolve between the Advanced Therapy Committee of the EMA and the CHMP? Clinically, how do we get clinicians comfortable with these technologies? One of the discoveries of our consortium is that whilst, of course, a clinician can prescribe a drug using a pen, in fact, most of these technologies are going to require quite sophisticated surgical insertions. And this is not the sort of thing that even highly trained surgeons are used to doing. So how do we incorporate it in clinical practice? And then the challenging questions of reimbursement and affordability. And of course, the affordability question comes to the fore when we have perhaps one-shot injections that companies may want to charge hundreds of thousands of euros for, that effectively cure a disease over the next years of a patient's life. And so I think we're going to need new pricing structures so that the payers feel comfortable in paying these kinds of high costs, which are inevitable with these very specialized technologies. So what do we learn from experience so far? I think there have only been 4 advanced therapies so far successfully put through the EMA. Just to pick out 2, Glybera faced, as I will show in the next slide, some quite interesting regulatory process challenges. Provenge was not so difficult from that point of view, but has had a struggle demonstrating delivered value. Because at European level, we have an interplay between 2 committees, and even at a UK level, the MHRA has to coordinate with a number of other authorities listed here in order to get something through first clinical trial approval and then full approval for use. What is interesting, I don't think we have time to explore it, but it's interesting that other nations like Japan and Korea are taking a more aggressive approach and may therefore steal a march to some extent on Europe. Just quickly, the Glybera experience took a number of years. There was a point at which the Advanced Therapy Committee was saying yes and the CHMP was saying no. And of course, if we can't solve these problems, as it says in the red at the top, investors will shy away from supporting companies bringing these therapies forward, particularly small companies that have very little in terms of financial reserves. So we need to learn from these experiences quite quickly if we are to realize the promise of gene therapy, cell therapy, and tissue engineering. As we all know, the current development path for chemical drugs, it's not terribly well adapted even for that, but it would be very poorly adapted for advanced therapies. So the key point I want to make really is that we need to move from this current pathway where we expect to do extensive clinical trials prior to a single license to the under a circumstance where we expect to treat a large number of people over a long period of time in trials, to a situation which is now being called by IMI and FPIA and others MAPS, Medicines Adaptive Pathways for Patients, where we do rather limited trials to create an initial license, and then an increased number of patients monitored with active surveillance. So this shift to a more adaptive development pathway, I think, has a great deal to offer when it comes to advanced therapies. In fact, I find it difficult to imagine that we're going to be successful with advanced therapies without using this kind of approach. And so very quickly then, what are the characteristics of that approach? I'll put all of these up first. That the most important feature, I think, of MAPS from every point of view, including advanced therapies, is a collaborative step at the beginning where you bring together both the sponsor, i.e. the innovative company, you bring the regulator, and you bring reimbursement authorities and payers together to say what evidence base are we going to need so that we can then select the highest benefit risk patients and then work towards a conditional approval subject to subsequent collection of safety, effectiveness, and value information, and perhaps wider approval to a greater number of patients. I think this will happen in a few countries first, although Europe will give its approval. You need the kind of stakeholder engagement that means that that'll happen in just a relatively few countries, I believe. I think the UK would like to play its part in this. And all of this is a form of precision medicine, which I think is the only way that these advanced therapies can move forward. So, Duane, that's my key point on advanced therapies and how we can use adaptive development to advance them.
And I guess from one of the standpoints here, if we're talking about your new role, and I should also just say that you've recently been appointed to the UK as chairman of the UK Precision Medicine's Catapult. To me, what's intriguing here with you in particular, Richard, is that you sit at a nexus between a need for an adaptive pathway with these advanced therapies as well as what is the ultimate in a personalized therapy. I mean, what is more personalized than taking your own genomic material, manipulating it, and putting it back into your body? How do you see these two roles, just from your standpoint, between CASMI and the Precision Medicine Catapult playing together? How do you see these helping these technologies from IMI going to market? What would you like to do? What would you like to see happen in the next 6 months, 12 months?
Well, at the UK level, just to be a little insular for a moment, I think the UK wants to be the test bed for these kinds of personalized therapies. It doesn't have all of the companies involved in this area. You will hear from a company later that's based elsewhere. But I think we would like to be seen as a very receptive and flexible test bed and be able to engage both regulators like the MHRA and NICE and NHS as a payer to have quite detailed discussions about how these therapies are going to be regulated and paid for. At a European level, though, I think we need to build networks, not just clinical trial networks across the UK, but across Europe, so that, particularly for rare diseases, we get very close cooperation between researchers who are trialing these kinds of therapies. And that, I think, again, circling back, is a very good and important role for IMI.
Yeah, great. We're going to, again, just in the interest of time, we will allow for open questions at the end. I'd like to move on to Daniela Couto. Daniela, can you hear us? You okay? You there?
Yes, I'm here, and I can hear you perfectly.
Fabulous. That makes me so happy, Daniela. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you.
You're in an interesting situation. You are Cell2B, for people who don't know, is a small startup, now an orphan designation, and you've got a very interesting story, and I'm very interested in having you express that. So Danielle, the floor is yours, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Duane. First of all, I would like to say that I couldn't agree more with the previous presenter. So Richard, what you said about adaptive tools to support ATMPs through the clinical development pathway, Cell2B is applying. And I couldn't agree more. That's the way to move forward for this particular field, and could be also very useful for others. So I will not focus in the adaptive tools that we are using. I'll rather focus on the orphan designation, the challenges, and the balance we must obtain from having, at the same time, an orphan designation and the investment limitations that could bring. So Cell2B focused in new therapeutic solutions for unmet clinical needs, specifically from immunological source and inflammatory as well. So passing on to the next slide, just to give you an overview of the company, we are located in Portugal. We incorporated the company in Lisbon in 2011. Today we are a team of 12 to be honest, if we account with non-full-time employees. The technology we use mesenchymal stem cells from bone marrow of healthy donors that are isolated and expanded in our proprietary coating. So what we developed in collaboration with MIT and the Technical University of Lisbon is a coating that we use for the purpose of getting the cells and the cells with an improved immunophenotype. And we also have a large-scale bioreactor process that we are now using for scaling up manufacturing and scaling out manufacturing. So today we have orphan designation for our lead indication, graft versus host disease. We have been in several discussions with the European Regulatory Agency regarding our phase 1/2 trial for clinical proof of concept. And this is where we stand. We are basically ready to initiate this proof of concept trial for steroid-resistant severe acute GVHD. So next slide, please. Our approach to orphan designation. So the first orphan designation was granted to us back in 2013 for the treatment of GVHD using our product, ImmuneSafe, and was based on the severity of the disease, unmet clinical need, and the number of patients with the indication. So in this case, no more than 0.6 patients per 1,000 persons. And in 2014, based on the same criteria, we were granted orphan designation by EMA for the prevention of GVHD. Obviously, significant benefit will be reassessed by the committee upon efficacy results. But our goal here, and that's my main goal for this slide, is we aim to treat acute cases of GVHD with a single treatment. So this will not be, at least we expect it not to be, a chronic lifetime treatment. And that brings a completely shift in paradigm of what we have been used to in this sector, in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology sector. So if you can move forward to the next slide. Orphan designation was based on incidence, as I mentioned. And if you look to the number of bone marrow transplants done in Europe and in the US, those account for about 42,000 patients. Out of those, 50% develop a graft versus host disease, and 25% develop the most severe grades 2 to 4, which is our target population. So we have about 10,000 patients per year in the US and Europe. And here, once you approach investors, the question is, how much is treatment worth? And for such a niche disease, how much should we be? How much should be our market size? So if we go down to another slide, further down, so slide number 5, there are different health economic studies around the savings provided by treating acute GVHD. In this case, if you compare the cost of a bone marrow transplant without complications and the average cost for a patient that develops grades 3, 4, it's about 100,000 euros. And if there are complications associated with it, then the cost can be increased significantly. So one aspect that is not reviewed on these health economic studies are that, for instance, grades 3 and 4 present 70% and 95% mortality rates. Should we account for saving a life as part of the benefit in terms of cost that this brings to a patient? Because increasing 100,000 or decreasing 100,000 in treatment because you have cured the patient is one thing on direct costs, but then saving the life, should it be accounted or not? And how should GVHD treatment be reimbursed? And I think two of the questions I already posed. One is bringing cure instead of chronic treatment. And the other one is, should mortality rate account for the reimbursement discussion? So on my last slide, I kind of wrap up all this. So what is our motivation? Is basically, or what is my take-home message? We should start reimbursement discussions much earlier with the agencies, in this particular case with the European Regulatory Agency, and especially because we want better trial design that should really target what they are looking at to then provide reimbursement later on. And on the other side, we should prepare ourselves for a discussion that is coming, which is how is cure should be reimbursed differently than chronic disease management. So I think we need better healthcare economic models in this regard, and especially for orphan indications that bring cure. I think this is it. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to brainstorm.
Thank you, Daniela. I'm going to open up the mics here. I've got Richard here. If Fatiha is still with us, she can chime in. And I'm also bringing in the mic for Eduardo, the last speaker. You raise a really interesting point, and I think this warrants a little bit of a discussion here. Why is it that the current healthcare system, why do we think we're willing to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of euros, dollars, pounds, whatever, on chronic treatment, whereas a drug such as the one recently for hepatitis C that actually cures it, that is cheaper and by any health economic measure, is so controversial? Why do you think we're willing to do that? Daniela, if you want to take a first crack at that, why do you think that is?
I think it's basically historical reasons. We have been working with treatments that are for chronic management. So there are caps in certain countries, for instance, a 50K cap per year for the treatment of any disease. So there is a cap, and some countries have been establishing caps. But those caps are for long-term chronic disease management. If you bring cure, then should such caps exist, we should start having the discussions. Not only that drug has come along, but many others are in development, and the goal is to bring cure. So we should start having the discussion and prepare ourselves to reimburse differently in these particular cases.
And Eduardo, I hope you're with us. I mean, this goes right to the core of the, what Tigenix is trying to do with their business model. I mean, sort of standard of care versus better care, which your clinical results are certainly superior. How is Tigenix dealing with this issue?
Well, we're dealing like everyone, trying to deal one regulatory body by a regulatory body, and why I would say even more reimbursement authority by reimbursement authority. The issue, as Daniela is mentioning, is the fact that there isn't, and I will cover that during my presentation. There is not one single European market. There is not one European reimbursement authority. In countries do use different models to pay for advances. And I think that the biggest challenge today is that simply we're running out of money. So the budget for healthcare keeps rising, and there's only one certain thing, which is people do want to live longer, and people do want to live healthier. But the money is not forever, and I think that we will have to make some tough choices on how do we want to spend our money, and what are the products or things that as a society we want to reimburse, and maybe things that today are given for granted or are free will come with a price tag, and people will have to get used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add a point to that. I mean, it's also, I mean, Eduardo has made exactly the right point with regard to the economically strapped health systems, and the way budgets are managed. They're managed year on year, silo by silo, if people know what I mean by that. And so I don't think it's just advanced therapies that will hit this problem. Some diagnostics, expensive diagnostics, will hit this problem. We need to have some recognition of the ability to earn a return over years. or we need some financial structures. We need, and other industries have solved this problem, sale and leaseback arrangements, that kind of thing, where you have a financial instrument that comes between governments and suppliers. So I think we have to be pretty creative, or this will be a brick wall that advanced therapies will hit.
Certainly. And Fatiha, do you see IMI trying to do some of the regulatory science in this space and trying to provide answers going forward? Is this something that you feel IMI will move into?
What I have to say is that at each of our scientific committee meetings, we have an observer from EMA who is sitting there and, participating in each means when need be for any subject of interest. It could be for tools and tools for research, or it could be disease modeling or any disease that is discussed there. But from what I hear here is quite something that often comes back, is the possibility to ensure that there is this networking and this discussion not only with the regulators but also with the HTA. And I mean, is there a facilitator for that? Is there any platform for which eventually horizontal criteria could be addressed, no matter what disease we are, discussing, or at least, having a common ground where this, discussion and chat could take place in order to make this progression towards, individual case later on. So this is something from what I heard today that seems for me missing.
Okay.
And how to make the gap between the translational research, the fundamental research towards this, advanced therapies when need be. I mean, how do we hook the fundamental and the translational, which is not yet, in the field of advanced therapies or clinical trial or any way, how to make sure that there is an added value in what is produced in different IMI projects. You mentioned the maps, so probably this is a kind of platform which could integrate also something in the field of advanced therapies. But this is something definitely which needs to be clarified and probably propose something which will help towards that.
And that's a great point about how do we bridge that gap. Before I go to Eduardo for the final presentation, Daniela, how do you, you're fighting this right now, you're there. How do you see that gap? What would be useful for you to bridge that gap right now? Is it just money? Is it more VC? Is it access to markets? Is it reimbursement? Is it all of it? What's your opinion on this, Daniela?
So, well, there are a lot of challenges. Reimbursement is more down the road. And today the biggest challenge is indeed investment from venture capital in Europe. So we are preparing a report with NEB, and one of the VCs, and you actually can read it, Forbian, well-seasoned VC, just said the situation goes along those lines. So the situation for venture capital is very comfortable in Europe because there are so many projects and so few investors. They can actually take the time we want to select the best projects or the ones that we feel are more aligned with our strategy. And it's a very comfortable situation indeed for venture capital in Europe. But we lack the money, especially in areas such as regenerative medicine that have 20, 30 years of history to move forward. And I think that's even more evidence in countries, most of the countries, well, maybe the UK is an exception, maybe. But I think that translates well our current situation.
Is the UK an exception, Richard?
No, there's a lot of money in the City of London, but it doesn't get directed at this kind of thing.
No.
And although I think we'd like to be as regulatorily flexible and flexible in reimbursement as possible, the realities are not very different, I don't think.
Yeah. And now we'll turn to Eduardo for your presentation. Eduardo, ironically, you are the you're the mature company, believe it or not. I probably hard to believe from your standpoint, but Tigenix was the first company to have an advanced therapy passed under the EMA. And it's a company living in Belgium, it's a company I've had my eye on for a long time, been a big fan. So Eduardo, please tell us how things are going and how you see this situation.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne, for inviting me to take part in this webinar, and thank you the previous speakers, because I think that they really lay out the ground very nicely. So Tigenix is very small, probably one of the most advanced companies in the world in the area of stem cells, despite the fact that we're just about 55 employees, and we have a market cap that is just north of 100 million euros. So that gives an idea of how tough after 15 years, and I would say with quite a few successes. So if you go to the first slide, and that gives an idea of what sort of a pipeline Tigenix has today, with 3 products, the ones that start with CX, 601, 611, and 621, which are based on our proprietary platform of allogeneic adipose-derived stem cells. So we take fat from a healthy donor, we select the stem cells, we expand them significantly, and then we use those cells with different concentration, different dosages, and different routes of administration to treat inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. The most advanced of those compounds is CX601, which was the first ever stem cell product to be granted orphan designation, and we have announced the end of a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. So one of those large trials that Richard was mentioning, 289 patients have been recruited, and we will be getting the results in July. So if those results are positive, we're confident that we can file for marketing approval early next year. The second asset is CX611, which is an intravenous administration of the cells which we're developing for 2 autoimmune diseases. One is early rheumatoid arthritis, and the other one is severe sepsis. But what Tigenix is best known for probably is the last of the products on the slide, Couto Select, which is the first advanced therapy product that was approved and made into and launched into the market. And before I move into what are the difficulties, let me give you some timelines. So the product was approved in 2009. This is one of the great things about the European legislation. You have a centralized approval. So the product was approved mid-2011. But the first country that reimbursed the product, which was Belgium, not a surprise being a Belgian company, it took us more than 2 years. It was not until 2011 that the product was reimbursed in its first market, and this is for a company that needed to be alive for another 2 years, just paying all the expenses and getting ready while having 0 revenues. Even today, the product has been approved just in fully reimbursed in 3 European countries, partially reimbursed in 2. So it's one thing is getting the product approved, and the other one is getting the sales, as I will discuss in a minute. So we go to the following slide. There's a huge gap between the development of the industry in the US and in Europe. Daniela was referring to this lack of ecosystem in Europe, where lack of VCs and lack of growth money really are making it very difficult for companies to grow in Europe and stay in Europe. And we see more and more companies either going public directly in the US, moving into the US, or raising additional funds into the US, and even being sold to US companies. So there's less and less of the investment and the jobs that stays in Europe. Why the difficulties? And I've tried to summarize them in two big chunks. One is the fact that we call it Europe, but we are a very, very fragmented market. And it's 28 countries, but in some of the countries, and being Spanish, I can tell you Spain is probably one of the paramount examples. Then you have 17 autonomous regions. So you multiply the number of countries by the number of regions that have responsibility over budgets and approvals, and you end up with a very, very fragmented market. where there's no single unity, not even in the stock market. So you have some companies quoted in London, some companies quoted in Paris, some companies quoted in Stockholm, in Switzerland, or in Belgium, and that makes it very difficult for investors to really create a small sector where they can diversify and better understand. Not only that, but also the public programs. With the exception we just heard of IMI or Horizon 2020, the majority of the grants and subsidies are given at national, regional, or local levels. So again, making it very difficult for companies to reach the sort of NIH funding that the U.S. have. As I was mentioning, the lack of ecosystem with very few specialized biotech investors and very few growth capital players. I always make the joke that you can visit all the big funds, specialized funds in Europe in a week, and with 1 week of roadshow in the U.S., you don't leave the Fifth Avenue in New York. So that gives an idea of the amount of money and specialized investors each side of the Atlantic. And as I was mentioning at the very beginning, once one thing is getting the product approved, the next barrier, even bigger, is getting the product reimbursed, also because countries use different ways of appraising the product. So, NICE having a very clear one, and Germany having another very clear one. Just to give the example of two very large markets, use completely different methods for paying for value, which is a little bit of an odd situation. Another big barrier for the ATMP industry, which is really in our hands, is the way the ATMP legislation is being translated in the different European countries once again. And I have here a couple of examples. One, which is my battle every day, is this hospital exemption rule that is being used in some countries, and Germany and Spain are clearly the best examples as a defensive measure by the governments to try to protect their local markets. In Germany, that means protecting some small German companies. In Spain is really this, I think, wrong idea of trying to protect some public research and hospitals that are doing some small, very, very small and non-conclusive trials with stem cells. But also, some of the things like, in the way we produce cells, the way the tissue procurement is being translated, for example, in Belgium, really making it very difficult to produce allogeneic products in Belgium. And that was the reason why, Tigenix, when we first built our first manufacturing facility, we went to the Netherlands. So that shows the sort of impact on the small company, but also on the countries and on the region that these measures have on jobs and value creation. Finally, there's this whole discussion now of whether the ATMP legislation should be reopened, and there's plenty of things that could be improved within that ATMP legislation, but it's clearly that the worst scenario we believe will be the reopening of the legislation, and again, investors having the uncertainty of how the playground will look like a few years down the road. So there's things to be improved. There's things that we can change. Let's not, for making a couple of improvements, let's not create this huge uncertainty that may come from reopening the legislation. Finally, I think that we're working very hard in trying to harmonize the different regulatory bodies in the world, and that's something that from the Alliance of Regenerative Medicine and the Advanced Therapies we're working on doing. Finally, to finish on a positive way, we go to the next slide. There's not only negative things. There's a few things that I think are helping. I've mentioned the centralized marketing approval. I think that the new movement of getting also centralized approval of clinical trials will be a major help. It took us a 1.5 years difference between getting our clinical trial approved in Spain and in Germany. The European patent protection and having one patent that will be covered and hopefully granted for Europe will be of value. This conditional marketing authorization that we're talking to, and as Richard was mentioning, this adaptive development. The challenge here is making sure that the reimbursement discussion happens at the same time. It's great that you get your product approved with so to speak, a nice phase 2 clinical trial, but without convincing safety and efficacy measures, I don't think that reimbursement bodies will pay for the trial. So you may end up like with ControSelect, that you get your product approved, but then you really struggle to get the reimbursement authorities to pay, a few €1,000 at least for these very revolutionary therapies. So if you go to my conclusion, just to end up with a little bit of humor, I think that the opportunity is huge. I just hope that we will make sure that we're not trying to capture in Europe this huge opportunity of developing and making Europe the area in the world where these advanced therapies could flourish, just by doing a little bit of investment, coming with a couple of innovative regulatory approaches that then can be adapted by the different countries in the most creative ways, and creating the holes so that the opportunity will disappear. So Dwayne, I would like to end up here and eventually take some questions or any comments that people may have.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. I just have a question for you, just right off the bat. We're going to run a little bit late, ladies and gentlemen. We started a little late. We had a technical hitch, but so we're going to run just about 5 or 10 minutes long. Eduardo, one of the things about Tigenix that I find fascinating is this was a company that had a $500 million market capitalization through the Euronext mid-cap stocks. You got the approval, as you mentioned, in 2009 by EMA through the accelerated pathway under stem cells and advanced therapies. You then went for the co-ruling with the FDA, and it looked like everything was lined up. You had acquired production facilities in the U.S., and then FDA required another trial, and everything sort of relied then back on Europe. I guess from my standpoint, one, how would Tigenix be looking differently if it had gotten FDA approval, and two, what does that say about Europe? What are the conversations you've had to articulate this problem, and what has the response been?
Well, I think that the FDA, again, tries to be as objective as possible, and as every regulatory body in the world is as subjective as they are. So, so at the end, the FDA, which had told us that we could file with just one randomized clinical trial, came back when we were going to file with the request that we should run a second randomized clinical trial, which is, for an indication like the cartilage defect, means, at least 3-year follow-up of the patient. So you're looking at 5 to 7 years clinical program, a lot of money involved, which we didn't have at that time. Funnily enough, that meant that the only product that is staying in the market in the U.S. is Genzyme's Carticel, which, by the way, had no clinical evidence whatsoever. So, just that shows how those things happen. Again, in Germany, ControSelect gets only partial reimbursement, very limited reimbursement, because we have not provided enough clinical evidence, but this is the only compound in the market in Germany that has a randomized clinical trial. There's 5 products being sold today without the same quality controls, without a single patient being treated in a randomized clinical trial, and they are fully reimbursed. Guess what? They're German companies. So that's the issue, and I think that that's our fight today, is making sure that, okay, ControSelect may be history. It's not going to be a huge product, but let's make sure that we don't make the same mistakes, so that we can build companies that are successful, and that the companies that make the investment, provided that they come with the right clinical data, can come with some profits, and therefore investors will be willing to take the risk of backing those companies.
Thank you. I'd like to bring in both Daniela again and Fatiha for just a couple questions just to finish off. There's a very good question here from Tamisha Jackson. Can the speakers touch on the challenges associated with devising the appropriate risk management plans for advanced therapies? How do you see that? How do you see the risk management plans for the registries and affecting the overall cost of the therapy and reimbursement? Daniela, you want to touch on that? You want to give that a crack?
Sure. Well, to be honest, I think the best person to go through that is Eduardo, that has been through many risk assessment assessments with the agency. But I think it's crucial that you provide your assessment very well supported by data. And I have that feeling based on discussions that we have had with the agency. So once you provide your overview, you have to back it up and possibly do it 2 or 3 times or iterate the process so that you have a strong commitment once you move forward and have the follow-up data from the patients and so on. You are able to rely on that commitment that has been done, both by the agency and HTA bodies.
Eduardo, what do you think? How do you see devising a risk management plan for advanced therapies? How do you manage that at Tigenix?
Well, again, in our case, we were asked to perform a follow-up trial, and we are, following every single patient that gets ChondroSelect. Again, contrary to the patients that receive the non-approved chondrocytes. So every single patient that receives ChondroSelect is followed. Is part of a registry in which we follow, measure efficacy and safety of those patients, and we have, more than 250 of those patients now in the registry. For the following products, I think that again it will depend very much on the indications. I think that we're going for relatively low number of patients and cells which are adult cells that have been already injected in thousands of individuals. So we are less concerned. I think that for the most, I think that the biggest challenge here is we're discussing at the beginning, how do you do it for very orphan, ultra-orphan diseases in which, you will have data on very few patients, and that probably will be very difficult or almost impossible not to have big clinical trials. And again, again, it will be a health issue whether we give access, maybe through compassionate use, maybe through registries to the patients, while we ensure that there's some follow-up of the patients. But we cannot hold on some genetically, patients to have them waiting years and years for an innovative therapy while there's no cure available. And that's, this risk-benefit analysis that needs to happen in conjunction with the patients. I mean, it's funny that sometimes these regulators or health authorities deciding which side effects the patients do prefer, rather than engaging the patients, especially in these ultra-orphan indications, to have a say into which risk they're willing to take to eventually try a new therapy. So that would be my approach.
Thank you, Eduardo. Fatiha, just quickly from your standpoint, we've had a question here from Anka Holtorf. How do we balance the need to invest in innovation with the need to care for everyday diseases? How do you see IMI balancing those two demands? How do you see that going forward?
I mean, if you look from our portfolio of projects, I mean, we are really looking at the main disease, the diabetes, the cancer area. So these are really, how to say, diseases which are major disease, and within this disease, we are looking for innovation. Innovation by, how to say, developing new tools, by developing biomarkers, by going to diagnostics. So it is a daily work which include not only, how to say, diseases that are major disease, as I mentioned, but also innovation, because this is the aim of IMI. But if I have a question, regarding, I mean, we know that there are not many products on the market, advanced therapy product on the market. Is there somewhere a kind of all these companies, SMEs, which have been able to market a product that could, how to say, write something as lessons learned? This will help people who are going through all the process to at least have these highlights and make sure that this can help them in their way further.
Well, Fatiha, really, you couldn't have lined me up any better. Yes, as a matter of fact, there is, and we'll be releasing it on April 15th at the BioVision conference. EBE, Vital Transformation, and BioVision are working on a report right now on the current state of play of advanced therapies. outlining all of these issues, and that report will be released. We'll be also printing 500 copies of that report, and we will happily send innumerable copies in PDF form to you and bring over. I'll personally carry a stack of hard copies to IMI offices. It'd be my pleasure. So yes, we're working on a report, and this will be released next month. And again, for EBE members, you can attend this conference for free. We still have a few seats available. We've got a bunch more questions. Unfortunately, we are well over time, and I'm going to need to push on. I'd like to thank very much Fatiha, Eduardo, Daniela, and Richard for their time today. Again, please, if you have any more questions, email them to Vital Transformation. We will certainly endeavor to answer them. We will also be following up with a questionnaire afterwards. Again, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for your time. I think it was an exceptionally interesting webinar, great discussion. And again, this webinar is not closed. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.